I don't think anyone can deny that there's something fun and magical about a sense of escape into some sort of dreamlike or interpreted space.
Our friends laughed when we first said we were going. I can't figure why they all made.
Welcome to the Marinade, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. Each episode, we welcome musicians, actors, comedians, authors, visual artists, filmmakers, anyone who creates art to talk about how and why we make stuff. This is episode 164, and our guest is Dustin Kensrue. Dustin is a singer and songwriter from California who came to notoriety with his band Thrice in the early 2000s. He's gone on to release several gorgeous solo records, including the latest album, Desert Dreaming, which has captivated me from the very first listen. Everyone, it is my pleasure to bring you my conversation with Dustin Kensrue.
Dude, thanks for doing this. I'm excited.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Truly my pleasure, man. I've had the great honor of listening to Desert Dreaming now for some weeks and like really devouring it. And
Thanks, man.
what a beautiful record. What an incredible record that you've made.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I want to dive into the record and I want to talk about process in general and so many different things. But I think like one of the things that just blew my mind about it is I think there are so many records that I listen to now that are sort of some version of Americana or alt country or however we want to categorize these records that are country influenced or leaning, but aren't necessarily purely country. This is a country record. Like when I listen to it, it's like so true to country music, whatever that might mean to different people. To me, it is something that feels timeless. It feels fresh, but it feels timeless. And it's country as hell. And I love that.
Thank you. I mean, it depends who you're saying that to and when and all of that, but it's drawing a lot from kind of 50s and 60s classic country stuff, and it's drawing from other places too, but I think it definitely kind of finds its bearings and its balance in moving out of that sort of place and time.
So when you're writing this record, are you listening to a bunch of 50s and 60s country music?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that I just dig a lot of that stuff. But the songs themselves come up on their own, and meaning that there's kind of just melodies that pop into my head, and I'll record those, sometimes just the melody, sometimes with acoustic guitar, and there's ones that keep kind of bubbling back up. Like I'll record it a couple times without realizing it was the same one because it's weeks later, but it's just still apparently looping in my head. And so there's ones that are kind of begging to be born in a sense. And there's a lot of ways you can push those into different places, and how you actually treat an arrangement for that song. And so I think when a lot of these songs started coming together, I didn't probably understand how far this whole record would push into that kind of classic country western space. But that became more and more clear as time went on, and I started to feel, the gravity of where it was going. And then as I started to understand that, I did start looking for kind of touchstone, 1, 2, 3 songs for each of my songs that would be kind of bouncing off points of like, oh, this was an interesting, rhythm in this song. I want to play with something like that. Just trying to, I think, get a variety of sounds and tones and feels on the record, and not have it end up sounding, too flattened or monochromatic.
Okay, so can you take us back to that sort of that moment where you kind of recognize that it's becoming this way sonically, right? So you like what I heard you say was like maybe at first that's not exactly what you heard, or maybe that's not exactly where you knew it was going. Can you talk about that process and like where that shift, kind of dive a little bit more into where that shift occurred?
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty slow slide, I think. I've definitely been listening to a lot more country western in the past, 10 years, especially the past 5 years. I I didn't grow up listening to it, so I didn't know anyone that listened to good country music, and
Mm,
the only stuff I would hear is, on the radio in the 90s, and I didn't love that. Didn't
mm,
connect to me. And so I found stuff like Johnny Cash, Patsy Cline, Gene Autry, like just kind of randomly on my own, just walking around a record store and just being taking a chance on stuff. But I didn't know how to find more back then either. I didn't know anyone. So got into like alt country stuff in, late 90s, and then just in the last, 5 years, really digging into using streaming as a tool to find more and more things. So both old stuff that I'd never heard, and there's just a huge variety of amazing, more indie kind of Americana country artists out there. And yeah, so I think just the amount that I started listening to, it just started pulling me towards that. And I think part of what, like multiple things, I've been using this metaphor for with like gravity for a while, for the way that a record starts working for me is uh can't quite see what's at the center in the beginning, but things start pulling towards it. So both like the music,
mm,
and also for me on this record, like a lot of what ends up being the setting is a big part of the record. It's very much kind of set in the Southwest in different areas, and those two things working together started to really shape the direction.
well, I'm glad you brought up setting because I think the two sort of macro themes that jump out to me are setting or place, and it's just romantic. It's such a
Mm.
it's romantic as hell. And so I'm just it's a weird expression. I'm interested in kind of I'm interested in that, like how much place and the romance of place sort of play into your writing process, and how cognizant you were of that as you're writing these songs.
I mean, very much on this record. I think the romance of place is a good way to describe how it's handled on this record, because I mean, even the title of the record kind of is a clue in a sense to that this isn't it's a dreamlike desert. It's not necessarily the desert as it is. It's the desert as we interpret it through other pieces of art, and then we go and experience it, and then we bring it back and make something new. So I've been kind of fascinated by that idea of um, the way that I experience the desert, or anywhere, but in this case, the desert or the Southwest is influenced by the art that I have uh, been exposed to that deals with already, and that's kind of a
Mm.
cycle. Because so then I end up making art that's inspired by my interpretation of this, that's already been through another lens, and there's just this continuous kind of outpouring and inpouring is not a word, I guess. I guess it could be a word.
Hmm.
There's there's an ebb and a flow to the way that we experience anything, and it's never completely divorced from what we've been exposed to, what we know already. And there's something cool about that. But as I kind of started to finalize where the record was going, there is this very dreamlike or romantic, romanticized, whatever quality to it. And I think some of that's, playing off 50s, 60s nostalgia kind of feelings as well, which I think can be dangerous to lean too heavily into. But
Mm.
I don't think anyone can deny that there's something fun and magical about a sense of escape into some sort of dreamlike or interpreted space. Yeah, I don't know, started going all over there, but I, oh, so I was gonna say I did pull a song that I was originally, I really liked the song, but it just did not fit where the entire record was going, and I wanted it to be a listening experience that uh, felt like it all really worked together and didn't take you to this. And there's darker moments on the record, but the song that I was playing with was like dark in a different way, and yeah, so I pulled it. But yeah, I'm glad you're seeing all those connections. It's cool.
Well, I love what you said there about because I think a lot about romanticizing the past, especially something like the 50s and 60s, where like there's so much negativity there too, and there's so
Yeah,
much that we want to be
absolutely.
careful not to romanticize. But I also think there's something, I'm trying to think of how you put it exactly, but there is something kind of magical and helpful in romanticizing sort of an aesthetic and some of the ideals, right, that maybe
Hmm.
weren't necessarily present, but
Yep.
in the 50s, but some of these ideals, I've been reflecting on that a lot in my 40s, like some sort of things that are old fashioned, being careful about not allowing the misogyny and the racism and those negative things to be a part of that romanticization, but also and recognizing them and dealing with that and processing that, but also recognizing some of the sort of the slower pace of life and so the family sitting around having dinner, whether that was how real that was or not, and how ugly it was or not. The romanticization of it for me is kind of nice to think about as an ideal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is definitely a value in redeeming and rescuing certain things that, like, I mean, this is an example that it makes sense to me just because I'm really into cocktails and especially love like a good tiki bar.
Mm.
But there's a very complicated history of appropriation there, and there are a lot of there's a lot of things that I think can be left behind or shifted or changed in some way and still retain this weird, beautiful escapism that is the tiki bar. And, whether that's, you can make, like in San Diego, there's this amazing tiki bar called Mothership, but it's all themed in this future crash on another planet. And so they've
Mm.
taken all of these things that make a tiki bar really fun. It's immersive, it's themed, it's what, but you've completely taken out all of the kind of Polynesian influence that can be problematic. And I'm not saying all of that has to go all the time, and that's for kind of people to figure out on their own. But there's a way to grab something that came out of this tradition and kind of move it over and do something beautiful with it, and I don't know, just play with it. So
Yeah, I love that. And I think that you do such a great job of capturing, like I said, the romance jumps out at me. I mean, I think about like a few songs that I love the whole record. I think it's just absolutely outstanding and top to bottom, cohesive work that's beautiful and that tells so many great stories. Treasure in the West is one that really stands out to me. Like that I met a girl with lips so ruby red, bright copper curls and sheets of silken thread. She begged me stay with diamonds in her eyes, but I stole away to find my real prize. Just gorgeous writing, man, and just such a romantic. There's so much. There's a lot of like. That's at least the second time you use the analogy of jewels there, like in that same song. It's just like really beautiful. A couple of times, several times actually in that
Yeah, that
song.
song's pretty dense with that. It's was a challenge to to make it all work there, but it's kind of doing this big metaphor of someone searching for treasure out in the desert, but they're missing that literally every moment around them is a treasure,
Mhm.
and they're passing all of it by, which is, if you zoom out a bit, the way that we approach life a lot of times, looking for something that we think is going to be there, but we're missing the moment that we're in right now.
Man, I feel like the whole record, to me, as I listen to it at least, the whole record begs one to be present and begs one
Hmm.
to sort of like, first of all, spend time with the songs because they're so captivating, but also lyrically and thematically, it begs you to sit with it and to be present with it and to not do all the things that I know I've been guilty of in a fast-paced world, especially lately. To be distracted by other things and to not slow down. I feel like it does a great job of slowing the listener down. I wonder if you were aware of that, maybe as the writer for you, or just if you're aware of that for the consumer of the record.
Yeah, I mean, I think that idea of presence, or what's another way of getting at that? There's maybe I mean, this, it's interesting talking about this because I'm using an abstraction, this kind of dreamy approach to all of this, to push the listener towards a place of letting go of abstractions, in a sense that it's very hard to be in the moment, and experience what's happening instead of what you um, are interpreting to be happening, if that makes sense. Like,
Mm-hmm.
interpretation is a step removed from reality, and there are ways to actually be in the moment where you're not interpreting your experience all the time, you're actually just experiencing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that goes for aesthetic things, like if you're out in the desert looking around, and I found myself at a point in my life guilty of just being very jaded towards the Southwest, and just feeling like it's just brown, everything's just brown
Mm-hmm.
and dead and whatever, and that's such an interpretation of what's actually there, and there's a way to just be present with what it is, and I kind of fell in love with the desert all over again, and but that same thing is going on in life all the time, with people that you love as they make certain choices, and maybe that's not the choice you would make, and you start thinking about what you would do differently, or what you wish they would be, and instead of just being like, oh, like appreciating that person in that moment for what they are. And yeah, so the record, I probably half the record is playing on those ideas, in one way or another.
Man, that appreciating the person for who they are and pardon me, and try being careful about judging people for certain decisions is something that lately has been hitting me, just like constantly showing up in my life and asking myself, especially at this stage of my life, in my early 40s, like shit, coming up on my mid 40s soon enough. But just sort of like processing the idea of who I'm spending my time with and who I'm giving my energy to, and how much am I allowing people into my life or cutting them out even more, cutting them out for decisions that maybe I don't agree with, but that don't necessarily do those decisions get to the essence of who they are, and are those decisions affecting me? And that's a huge question that I'm wrestling with constantly. So it's helpful for you to hear you kind of talk about that. That's what was sparked in my mind as I heard you say that.
Yeah, it's a, I don't know. I guess I don't have to have anything to add to
No, no,
that.
that could just be the thing.
That's it.
Death Valley Honeymoon's another song. You have the wonderful Cat Clyde, who has been a guest on this very podcast.
Oh, cool.
I got to catch up with Cat in Canada, actually. I'm based in
That's great.
Orlando, but I was up in Canada a few years ago. I was up in Toronto, and she happened to be nearby. So she met me at a brewery up there, and we talked for about an hour or so and got to know each other a little bit. She's so awesome. That song is just standout, man. I mean, it leads off the record. Like you come out swinging. I mean, the whole thing is beautiful, but you come out swinging. Can you talk about working with Kat and talk about that particular song?
Yeah, so that song was kind of one of the pieces of uh, clarification or crystallization of the direction.
Mm.
When I had heard some of these stories before, but I was talking to my mom and some of my family about her parents, my grandparents, and they had honeymooned in Death Valley, which uh, just always it struck everyone as a little funny. It just sounds funny, like Death
Yeah.
Valley, and you're going on your honeymoon there. And the connection to some of my grandma's story before they had married, it was just kind of a wild story, and I do like a lightning rendition of that in the second verse there. But once I hit on just the title Death Valley Honeymoon, I was like, that is a song that I have to write. So
Mm.
that started to pull a lot of other things towards it. I was like, okay, I see what kind of song this is going to be. I see how that's going to pull the record in a certain direction. And yeah, and that song, the melody was one of those that just melody and chords all came out together. It was just one thing. I just recorded it and I was like, well, that's gonna be a good one. That's already there. So and then as far as Cat, so the song has these three kind of stanzas, and the third one is from my grandmother's perspective. And so I wanted to get a gal to sing it. And my grandma was a hoot. She was just an amazing, fun, energetic, entertaining lady. And I wanted someone who could kind of hold down that energy that she had, and not try to literally sound like my grandmother, but bring the same kind of spirit to the track. So I listened through tons and tons of different artists, and it was cool because I found a lot of people I'd never heard before, but I found Kat in there, and it felt like her voice, her um, zest, I guess, in the way she approaches singing,
Mm.
felt like it would work really well. So yeah, she was down to do it, and got on the phone, and she asked me about my grandma to try to get into the headspace for it, which I thought was really cool, and made me know it was gonna be good. So
That's
yeah.
really cool. Man, so what is that? Speaking of headspace, so I mean, you've got all these wonderful solo records, and then you have your records with your band Thrice. How is that a different headspace in terms of writing? Like, do you wake up on the Thrice side of the bed or the solo side of the bed, or like, are you writing and you realize this is something that fits this way or that way? Because I think, one of the reasons I asked that is just because when I listen to your other solo stuff and then I listen to this, it's all great, but this feels like a different thing to me than the other stuff. And I'm wondering if there's like a different headspace that you're in, or if you just sort of you're going through your normal process and then you kind of get a feel for where it's headed.
Yeah, I think there's certain songs that can go either way sometimes, like but generally it feels pretty obvious, like when an idea comes out, does it fit for Thrice? Does it fit for solo stuff? Does it fit in some other category that I don't have time to have an outlet for, with which I have like four different imaginary projects that I don't actually get to make. But yeah, usually it feels like it sorts in one of those or the other. I try not to get stuck on that because there's definitely times where I'm like, oh man, no, this actually works for that. And yeah, so these songs definitely they're starting from the melody, like always. Whereas Thrice stuff is largely starting from instrumental spots. So I'd say that's the biggest difference is usually though there's some kind of instrumental thing happening and then with Thrice and then I start to sing over it. Whereas these are all just some melodies going in my head.
Hmm. Okay, can we have a little fun and indulge what some of those imaginary projects might be or sound like?
Sure.
Like what
Uh,
what kind of other projects are bouncing around in that head of yours that you're not able to get to for whatever reason?
um, I don't know. They kind of shift and blend at times, but there's one that's kind of pulling a lot of influence from some of the punk stuff that I grew up listening to, like really melodic and fun kind of
Hmm.
guitar lines, but it's much more uh, poppy in a sense than like Thrice would be, and different, different movements. And Thrice almost never does just kind of like straight ahead drum beats or stuff like that. Like it, um, so there's certain things that just I think playing guitar that just or like certain melodies that just end up feeling like they'd fit whatever that project is. There's a imaginary project I have with my wife because she's learning drums, which is really fun. So I'm
Nice.
trying to convince her that we have a two-person band, and I play bass in it, and she plays drums. And so my plan there is to eventually put out little like 7 inches and stuff. And I doubt I could ever get her to play a show or something, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But just doing like kind of layered stuff and being creative with what I can do with one instrument and layering and I don't know. So that's fun. I have kind of a pop side project that for a while I was trying to bring my brother in with, but we were terrible at actually making time to do it. So I don't know if that's ever happening. But yeah, it's just kind of indie pop stuff, kind of a darker feel.
Hmm.
And yeah, those are the main ones I think about.
That's awesome, man. Thanks for sharing all that. That's that
Yeah.
last one. I mean, they all sound cool, but that last one sounds like something that you would absolutely crush. You know, that's sort of a brooding indie record sounds like something that you can really sink your teeth into.
Yeah, like that was it's hard too. Like it's just hard to know like and this is my problem with everything is there's so many directions you can take anything and it
Hmm.
by choosing one thing you're not choosing all the other things and that's frustrating and um yeah, but that's just kind of the nature of creating. So,
Well, you've been doing this a long time. I mean, you've been doing this since you were a teenager. Like, is there making music, making records, touring. Is there any lessons that you learned in terms of, because we talk about creative capital a lot on this show. The idea, I've been thinking about it a ton recently and sort of where I spend my time. And I've been motivated to write lately, and it's been mostly going, for me, it's been going towards songs. And the songs are just a hobby for me, like the podcast is bigger than that for me. I want to write more fiction on a more serious level. And as much as I love songs, it's just been something that's been coming to me. So
Mm.
that's where I'm spending that creative capital. Have you learned any lessons or like from say early on as to where to spend that capital? You have all these projects you want to do, right? But you can't possibly do all of them at the same time. Um,
Mm.
are there any lessons you've learned or like advice you could give to young you? Like, do you feel like you did it the right way in terms of investing your time and creative capital? Was there anything you might go back and do differently?
I mean, I think something I'm trying to shift is like I'm planning on investing more in the solo stuff because it's been, 9 years between things, I think roughly each time, each like
Mhm.
main record, there's not a very consistent track record for people to follow and actually build an audience, stuff like that.
Mhm.
So it's something I love doing, and so I'm trying to kind of approach it in a way that like I'm not going to wait another 9 years. I'm going to
Mhm.
be kind of trying to put stuff out in between Thrice's cycle, which is hard. There's just only so much time, and at least for me, records take a long, long time to develop and write and record, and it's a
Mhm.
slow process. So, I'm already compiling all the ideas for whatever's next for solo stuff, even while I'm trying to be writing a Thrice record. And but yeah, now I'm like, so it's overwhelming then thinking about, I love the vibe of this record, but I'm like, I don't know if the next record gonna go with this vibe either. And I mean, I think it's gonna remain a bit more leaning into the country stuff than the last two, but
Mhm.
uh I don't know if it's gonna be, I don't think it will feel quite like this record. It might be a bit more updated as far as some of the influences. But it's mostly about like trying to follow where the songs that are the most exciting to you, like where the interpretations seem most fruitful. And yeah.
Very cool. This has been such a pleasure, man. I can't believe we've already been at this for a half hour, a little over a half hour, but we usually end on what you're getting down on. So I'm curious about the art that has you inspired right now. It could be music that you're listening to, it could be a painting you saw or a film you're watching or a show. Like what's got you fired up right now?
Hmm. I'm really bad at thinking of this on the fly. I listen to a lot of soul kind of stuff,
Mm,
and
like older
that's
soul
part
or more modern stuff or
both. Like I love, like kind of 50s, 60s soul stuff, but also a lot of newer stuff, some vocal kind of stuff, Leon Bridges, that kind of thing,
Mhm.
or also just a lot of the kind of fun instrumental stuff that's had a lot of world influence lately, like Krung band kind of being at the forefront of a lot of that. But there's just so many um, fun bands. Now, a recent one that I heard was Karate Boogaloo, which is guys that used to be in, or some of them used to be in the Cactus Channel, which is a cool band too. But what else? Oh man, uh, are you familiar with the Paper Kites? Had you heard
Mm-mm.
him at least? No? Okay.
No.
It's real mellow. It's nice to just kind of put on, but it's got a vibe. And then the latest record is called At the Roadhouse, and I just saw them with my wife out at this place out in the desert called Pappy and Harriet's, and they they were on stage there, and they were talking about how they had wanted a place like Pappy and Harriet's to kind of play at and have around, and they didn't have one in Australia, so they like we made one. So they basically went to the small town and were recording in a spot during the week, and then Friday and Saturday they'd open up to the people in the town to just come and listen to them play the new songs they were writing, and basically trying to make their own little spot inspired by this place they'd never been to, Pappy and Harriet's, and they were there playing it. So that was really cool. But that record is leaning more kind of country, and there's pedal steel on it. It's just a gorgeous record. Yeah, so I was just listening to that sitting on the couch with my wife last night, and that's a cool record.
I'll have to check that out. I love that concept. Again, coming back to romance, what a romantic idea. That like
Yeah,
it's
it's lovely.
beautiful. No, that's awesome.
Um, my wife's cousin is always hopefully I'll tell him to listen to this. Name's Kelly, but he always is just throwing songs at me, and I'm always like, yeah, I don't know. I feel terrible, and he's like, oh man, okay. And but then every once in a while he'll hit one. But he sent me Dylan LeBlanc. Have you heard him?
I was listening to him right before this interview, dude.
Ah, okay, yeah. So
I was
that
listening
that
to his new
Clarity
record.
record,
Yeah.
yeah, it's cool. So it's very, kind of there's a lot of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young kind of vibe, like a lot of Young, I feel like. But
Yeah.
it's cool. It's a good record. So that was one where he really hit.
I'm glad you mentioned it because I mean like it's so funny to me. I was listening to Pony Bradshaw's North Georgia Rounder, and I was like, all right, you have to listen to something else because when I put that record on, I'll listen to it for like a week. And
Wait, I haven't heard this. What is it?
Pony Bradshaw,
Tony Bradshaw. All right.
yeah, North Georgia Rounder, all his stuff is good, but the record that came out last like January, I think it was, and I got a hold of it in like November of 2022. So I listened to it for like 3 months before it came out, and I'm just obsessed with it. And then
Okay, I'll check it out.
yeah, check it out. And then when I put it in, I'll just listen. It's like there's just, it's sort of like when I put in well, here's a good example. Like the Wallflowers are about to come to Orlando.
All right.
And if I ever put on Bringing Down the Horse, I just like forget it. That's the next month of my life. I'm
All
only
right.
going to
That's
listen
fun.
to, no matter how many times I've heard it, I'm going to listen to it a million times. Isbell Southeastern. I could go
Yeah,
on and
that's
on,
great.
like all these records but yeah, North Georgia Rounder was maybe if Isbell hadn't put out Weather Vanes last year, North Georgia Rounder would have been my favorite record of the year. Because it's just obsessed. But anyway, I was like, you gotta listen to something else. So I put Dylan LeBlanc's back in, which is like basically just me back on my bullshit because I listened to that record 1,000 times when it came out too.
That's all right. That's good. That's the sign of a good record.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, your record's been on heavy rotation, man, and it's been fun to, especially getting ready for this conversation, to listen to it even more. I'd already listened to it several dozen times before it came out, and now I've just listened to it again and again and again over the last couple of days. And it's one of those records that doesn't get old. It's a beautiful piece of work, and I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to listen to it so many times and then also to talk with you. And I am stoked for later this month when you're going to be in Orlando. I'm really looking forward to that show.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, have a great night, man. And once again, I'm really grateful.
Cheers.
Dustin Kensrue, y'all. Thank you so much, Dustin. Thank all of you for listening. DustinKensrue.com for all things Dustin Kensrue. I got to see him on his most recent tour last month. Y'all, my love and I had the most incredible evening. He absolutely crushed. His band was outstanding. And then after the set, he just jumped off stage and took pictures and signed autographs for fans. No break, just right off the stage. interacting with people who had come to see him. Such a sweetheart. His fans are amazing too. The song you're hearing in this episode is Death Valley Honeymoon, featuring our friend Kat Clyde, which we talked about during this episode. Get a physical copy of Dustin's outstanding record, Desert Dreaming, over on his website, marinadepodcast.com, for all things The Marinade. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, Spoutable, Twitter, Blue Sky, Mastodon. We're on all the things, y'all. Some of those things may not even exist anymore. I don't know. We're there. We're there, though. And subscribe, y'all. Subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating on your podcast app. Tell a friend about the show. These are all free ways to support The Marinade. Go do that right now while you're listening, please. It makes a big difference for us and costs so little of your time and effort. If you really like what we're doing, please consider joining our Patreon community, where for just a few bucks a month, you can gain access to Patreon exclusive content like our show, Jason's Journey, where I talk about the moments that shape my creative life and provide a window into the process of making The Marinade. One of the best days of the month for me is recording What We're Getting Down On with my dear friend, the brilliant and hilarious Peter Haroldson. And that's about the art that has us fired up at the moment. Y'all, you can try a free trial of Patreon. See if you like it. No pressure. Try it for 7 days. Set a reminder on your phone in case you want to cancel. Keep going if you dig it. If you want to support The Marinade financially, but you don't want to commit to a monthly subscription, I totally get that. You can Venmo or PayPal us. It's just at The Marinade. All the money goes right back into making the show. We're planning on covering a couple of festivals just in a month. So anything helps. And, just gas money to get there, basically, is what I'm looking for. And it makes a big difference. But hey, listen, above all, this is a free show, and we're thankful that you listen and spread the word about The Marinade. And until next time, go out and create something. Cheers, y'all.